Hello, everybody. This is Rick Manning, President of Americans for Limited Government, along with famed cartoonist Tony Branco, who can't help but keep himself in trouble with the cartoons he does, and truly a great guy. So we're going to try to do this pretty regularly, where we have Tony on, and we're just going to talk about different issues and different things that are happening in the news, and get his unique perspective on it, because anybody can condense a 1,000-word article into a picture and a 4 words and make everybody get it and laugh. Maybe he'll turn this 30 minutes into a 10-minute broadcast. But anyway, Tony, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
No problem. First, I'll point out we've got back here, I guess on this side, we have the calendar, the Tony Tunes calendar, which many people have ordered, but it's this is just, I've got the September up. Here's the calendar as it's the cover of it. This is the Ultra Mega version. And I'm just going to show you I'm going to show you October just to give you a tease for next month. It's kind of an ode to the Tony did a year ago. To the moms movement, at going to school boards and saying, we're not going to let you abuse our children. We're not going to let you engage in grooming, trying to groom our children. And because the moms, parents as a whole were standing up, the FBI, the Biden administration went off and decided they were going to go after sick the FBI on parents who had the audacity going to school board meetings and questioning the wisdom of both CRT, critical race theory, and the sexual abuse that kids are being subjected to through both so-called gender affirming agendas out there, and also just the pornography that they're being subjected to. So that's our October calendar, and I put it there because in the October slot, we actually had a big fight over what should go into October, and I put it there for a very simple reason. That's where a lot of parents send their kids back to school really for the first time in September, but they're paying attention now to what they're seeing, and they're getting more and more upset. And so I wanted to just kind of raise up that issue, because I think it's going to be one of the primary untold issues, untalked about issues that's going to change Congress in 2022, in this 2022 election. So Tony, you've been at the forefront of this, figuring out, kind of advocating through your pen and pencil set. What are you seeing out there regarding this? Is this still a hot issue?
I think so. I think it's going to be a hot issue for quite a while. I see it a lot on the news broadcasts like Newsmax and Fox. I've done a few cartoons alluding to that. I think people are pretty fired up about that. As long as we keep it in the forefront, I think it'll be a major issue, along with so many, and that's the problem with the Democrats, is they're throwing so many darts at you. It's hard to keep track. But I do think that's a very important one for anybody that has kids.
Well, anybody who cares about the future of America. I mean,
Absolutely.
Get down to it. You don't have to have kids to not believe kids should be sexually abused, or indoctrinated to hate America. Right. And so that's and what we found is the left is more as strange as can be. If we sit there and we try to actually teach kids about, maybe respect and the flag salute and the like, it gets denigrated. But you go off on the other side and somehow having, transgender teaching day at the local library, the school library, is somehow acceptable. And I just kind of, you wonder how we got here, but the fact is, this is where we are. We need to do something about it.
Definitely backwards. Yeah, I wanted to bring up the calendar here for anyone that has not had an opportunity to buy theirs. It's a great Christmas gift.
Very good. And what's the delivery time on that now? I know it's gone down.
you're looking at about 2 weeks from the point of purchase, putting it in your cart.
Very good. Okay. Thank you, David. Tony, where do you think this is going in terms of uh, this whole crazy child porn thing that's happening? What do you see? I mean, on your cartoons, what kind of feedback are you getting on these things?
Well, if you're on the side of, if you're on the conservative side of things, I'm getting great feedback. If you're on the left, I'm getting threats and awful feedback. But that's sometimes when I get those nasty emails from the left, it means that I'm over the target and I'm making a difference. But it's their whole agenda is fired up, and they never stop. Now women's sports is in jeopardy, and I know that the Republicans say that they're going to do something about that, and I hope they do. But we just have to understand what we're up against. We're up against an ideology, Democrat, communist, socialists, that never stop. They never quit, and they haven't quit for a long time, and it's just going to get worse. The most awful things that you can think of in your mind that humans are capable of doing, just keep that in mind. That's what the Democrats will keep pushing, whether it's letting prisoners and murderers out of jail, whether it's disarming you so you can't defend yourself against their policies and of destruction. It never stops. Look at every issue that they've ever started 20 years ago, and a lot of people said, "Oh, they'll never be able to do that. They'll never be. There won't be this. There won't be that." Well, there is that, and it's getting worse.
Yeah, it is. One of the things what I'd like to do, David, let's take down the calendar right now and let's go to what I want to do is I'm going to just go to one of the comments, a couple of comments here I think is worth talking about. Mark Wright writes, if you kept Trump in there, he didn't clean the damn swamp, corrupt more than ever. And Mark, I one of the challenges is the civil service laws don't allow you to do that. Civil service laws create challenges for you and don't actually make it so cleaning the swamp is a lot harder than a slogan. In the past, about a month and a half ago, I laid out a 4-point plan on how to do it. We're going to talk a little bit later about something that was discovered at Health and Human Services regarding COVID relief and the abuse by Health and Human Services. Federal government employees were getting paid their salary of COVID relief. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later and some opportunities to drain the swamp. So stay tuned. We're going to some things that can be done and some things that we're pushing at Americans for Limited Government. Tony, let's hold on. That's where I want to go. Okay, so we got, I think Glenn wants to impeach. Mercedes Triguero wants to impeach. And there's a big argument if the Republicans take control, are they going to push impeachment? What do you think? What do you think they ought to do based on what you're hearing, Tony?
Keep in mind that if they impeach Biden, we have Kamala, and I guess we can draw up plans to impeach her. And we warned the Democrats, you start this frivolous impeachment thing, it's just going to just move into the future on both sides. And that's why impeachment should be very, very guarded. And I don't know if we should impeach Biden, but we have to look at who's waiting in the wings to take over. And that would be just as big a disaster as the other. So
we'll have we're going to have a conversation about that in an article I wrote, published yesterday, I guess published this morning and sent out to people this morning. But it's about Biden's incapacity and whether or not he's a threat to the world. But let's go and let's look at the one that David just had up, the Princeton one, because we were talking about our education system. Princeton University, Ivy League, private, based in Princeton, New Jersey. Beautiful campus, by the way. It turns out that in Princeton University, they have a program that marked Constitution Day every single year. And in the past, it was run by something called James Madison Institute, actually came up with it. And a few years back, Princeton moved it over to internally to one of their departments. And now they just celebrated it with these four radical people who were up there talking about how the Constitution is nothing more than a tool for geopolitical gaslighting, among other things. That was by, unfortunately, the representative of the University of Southern California who was there. And it was my alma mater. But it is so we saw this Princeton University Constitution Day that spent 2 hours saying the Constitution has been bad for the world. The United States of America has been bad for the world, and is in fact a negative influence in the world, and has been since its foundation. And that's you get down to it. That's what we're fighting. That's crazy. But Tony, you've done a lot of things on the Constitution. How do you react to this kind of craziness? When you think about this kind of crazy, how do you react to it? How do you put a pen to pencil to try to take this down in a visual way?
Well, as much as I possibly can, I try to point out that we're not a democracy, first of all, because a full democracy, is nothing but mob rule. We're a constitutional representative republic for a reason. Our founders realized that a democracy is nothing more than mob rule, and eventually erode into some kind of despotism or some type of dictatorship, or something that would take freedom and individuality away from people and away from the country. And the only people that it seems to be bad for is countries like the Soviet Union, or the former Soviet Union, or any dictator, or anybody that believes in communism or socialism. So that's a good earmark, or a good mark, or a way to measure if somebody is a communist or not, or has communist tendencies or socialist tendencies, dictator tendencies. If they hate our Constitution, that means they are not interested at all in the individual and their freedom.
Yeah, it's you look at it and you say, I wanted to read a quote off of this article, and maybe I'll go get it pull up on that messing up. I can't read that, David. So here is a full page. I don't know if anybody's seen it there, but I can see it. Here's okay. Let me read you this paragraph. Fernandez Kelly was joined by panelist Rafael Salazar Pereñas, a professor of gender and sexuality studies at the University of Southern California, who described the Constitution as a tool, quote, a tool of geopolitical gaslighting, end quote. The political analyst Rich Benjamin, who argued that the fact, quote, the fact and the dogma of the Constitution, end quote, have caused, quote, a racial crisis and a democratic crisis, end quote. And history professor Rosina Lozano, who barely even addressed the Constitution, choosing to focus on how a lack of bilingual ballots caused the, quote, disenfranchisement, mistreatment, end quote, of the Spanish-speaking community, including undocumented immigrants in America for decades. Now, Tony, let's just go to the last one because it's the most amazing one to me. The lack of bilingual ballots caused the disenfranchisement and mistreatment of Spanish-speaking community, including undocumented immigrants. Now, are undocumented immigrants eligible to vote?
Absolutely not.
So what is she talking about?
Well, they're talking about killing the Constitution and making it more of a full-blown democracy, because in that way, it allows them, if they can keep people uneducated about what a democracy is and what a constitutional representative republic is, they can enact their will on the people, against the people, And the only thing that keeps, and even Obama alluded to this, is the Constitution, the Bill of Rights says what the government can't do to the people, but it doesn't say what we can do to the people. So that right there kind of breaks it down to what their ulterior motive is in all of this.
And let me, Rich Benjamin, so it doesn't seem like we're picking on the Hispanic ladies in this particular thing. Rich Benjamin says it's caused, the fact and the dogma of the Constitution, whatever it means, have caused a racial crisis and a democratic crisis. Once again, it's James Madison. Maybe this is why they disinvited the James Madison Institute. James Madison specifically drafted the Constitution with the idea of protecting minority rights. Majority rule, minority rights. The reason we have a Senate and a House is because, which Madison had to have forced on him, by the way. The reason we have a Senate and a House is to make it so one election cycle can't change the entire tenor of the country. The Senate was supposed to be hard to get stuff through. The reason you have a president and not a parliament, the reason you have a president is to have another branch of government to implement the policies with the capacity to veto, to create another block against one election going crazy and people completely changing the character of the country and running over the people who lost that election. And so that was the purpose. That was how it was set up. The reason we have a court that then views it in the constitutional grounds is because the idea is, let's make certain that they're not doing things that deny freedoms as outlined in the Constitution. And lastly, the reason we have a Bill of Rights, the reason we have amendments to the Constitution is because the Bill of Rights in particular, a flaw that was seen was that essentially without the Bill of Rights, it was assumed that that people's rights would be protected, but the founders said, we need to enumerate them. And so we got the 10 Bill of Rights, and later on we amended them multiple times. Each of those was to assert individual liberty and ensure individual liberty against government excess. And now we've got these people who are, looking at the Constitution, who essentially want a constitution like the South African Constitution, which is a bunch of things that the government will allow you to do, but not things putting the power all on the side of the government, as opposed to the powers that the people grant the government under the consent of the governed. It's a completely different view of how our constitutional governments work. It's a matter of, are you in charge as the individual, or is the government in Washington, D.C. in charge? And the leftists want D.C. in charge because they want D.C. in charge because they can control D.C. and they can't control you. So that's the
excellent point, Rick. Let's look at this other story we had mentioned earlier. This person is trying to get off easy for this. Do you want to mention this story?
Sure. Same Free Beacon article. I just saw it on the side. There's a lawyer who, during the George Floyd riots, threw a Molotov cocktail into a cop car. Okay, she was an attorney. She was a advocate for social justice causes as an attorney, and now, she's trying to say, well, I was drunk and stupid, and overwrought, and so I took actions. Don't hold me accountable for those actions. I'm sorry. You threw a Molotov cocktail. It was a violent act, and yet she wants leniency because her violent act was justified based upon she wants her sentence to be commuted. It's based on some misguided idea that it was okay to throw a Molotov cocktail into a police cruiser in an act of violence, and she should not be held accountable as a result of the fact she was drunk and upset.
Two justice systems.
Yeah, she's trying to take advantage of the two-tiered justice system, and if you defend your son in front of an abortion clinic, you're going to have the 30 FBI agents show up at your door. So this is a lot of people are seeing that this is all wrong. Getting and merging this into with the Constitution, that's exactly what they want. They want people to be fearful if you're on the wrong side of the track or on the wrong side of their ideas. And basically, it's going back to we'll look at what the Democrats are trying to do. They're trying to stack the court to make that almost another legislative branch. They're trying to centralize our voting system, take away the electoral college. These are things, everything is pointing and directed right at taking away the representative, making sure that everybody, they're trying to take away the filibuster in the Congress. And so go down the road. Who's doing that? And where is this merging into some sort of type of fascist leaning type despotism other than the Constitution? Constitution guarantees our individual rights, and that is what that is where their war is.
Yeah, it is. So we'll see how this case turns out. But I put that up because the left has made such a big deal about political violence. Joe Biden got in front of the Independence Hall decrying political violence, somewhat ironic since Independence Hall symbolizes our revolution against the British, which was in fact political violence. But nonetheless, but the left is trying to create this thing where January 6th happened and nothing else happened. There's nothing else that occurred. There was no other political violence. And so as a result, they want to ignore this kind of thing. And the fact of the matter is, what this woman did, what this attorney did, was normative for 2, 3, 4 years leading up to January 6th. And when you set up a system where people see people getting away with burning down buildings, breaking into, trying to burn down federal buildings, and they see that there's no repercussions, and when that occurs, the fact of the matter is, it's not justifying it, but it certainly makes it so people say, well, if it's good for them, it's good for me. And that's a dangerous thing. Let me be clear. Political violence is not the answer under any circumstance. We have to stand against it. Political violence by its very essence is an attack on the rule of law. And the one hope our country has is that we can end this two-tier justice system and to go back to having a rule of law that whereas equal justice under the law for all, with Lady Justice blindfolded. That's what we have to seek to return to. And truthfully, the left it's going to be very hard to get the left to be able to do that, because a blindfolded Lady Justice will end up swinging her sword a lot more at their allies than they will at anybody on the right.
Well, you have Kamala Harris is put up a not a defund. What do you call it? The bonds for people that broke the law during those 574 riots over the last couple of years. And basically, that just appalls me. And a lot of people may not know about that. But what they want to do is they want to broad brush. They're the ones that always say you should never broad brush. If an explosion happens, it happens to be from a radical Muslim. You can't broad brush any of that, which I agree with. But they have no problem broad brushing Christians. They have no problem broad brushing Trump supporters or conservatives. 99.99% of the people that were there at the Trump rally didn't go in the Capitol, but they want to make it like because you voted for Trump. I was on the West Coast, but they're trying to paint me as somebody that went into that Capitol. They're trying to paint me as some kind of radical. I didn't agree with it, but that's their objective.
You're absolutely right. There was less than 1,000 people who are criminally charged right now, and 74 million Americans have become Nazis because of the actions of 900 individuals. And the rhetoric from the top is making it normalized.
David, let me be clear. A vast majority of the people who have been arrested were arrested for taking selfies in the Capitol. Okay, and they were put into grievous conditions. They weren't allowed to. We've got people who still are on pretrial detainment 2 years later. Okay, we have so this is a political. We're politically imprisoning people on the right, many of whom some were dead wrong and they should be convicted of violence against Capitol Police or the like. But let's just be clear. When you sit there and you look at what happened, a vast majority of the people who ended up being arrested and have been arrested were arrested because they were taking selfies in the Capitol. And many of them had been let in by the Capitol Police. So I'm not going to back away from my statement condemning violence, which I made on January 6th, by the way, and repeated on video on January 7th of 2000, whenever it was, 21. So this is not new to us. Bottom line on it is what we've done, what's happened is now a dangerous turn where the government has become, this gave the government an excuse to weaponize against the right. And so we end up with unequal treatment. Take a look at the article that David has up, Tony. You were talking about this. Why don't you talk about, go ahead, say what you got to say. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. I was just saying they've justified having political prisoners. If these, none of the people probably that had anything to do with the riot, the 574 riots where they burnt down courthouses and police stations and multiple businesses costing billions of dollars, I never hear about them sitting in prison. I hear a lot about them being bailed out, but I don't hear about them rotting in prison.
Recognize the DC Circuit will not, as basically said, no bail. So you can't get bail if you're arrested under this. You are guilty until proven innocent, and it's a travesty. And quite honestly, a lot of members of Congress, not enough members of Congress, have taken up this cause.
But just goes to show how they feel about the law. The law doesn't matter. The Constitution doesn't matter. It goes right back to that.
I'm not sure what they'll do in January in Chicago. They're going to have no bail for second-degree murder in Illinois.
Well, I just stay out of Chicago or stay out of we can go down that whole path. It's dangerous. And I think one of the things this election is going to be back. Jen Psaki said it this weekend that the Democrats are scared to death that this pro-criminal approach that they're taking and the crime wave that it's inducing is in fact going to be create a backlash in communities that they assume are going to vote for them. But I'm sorry, if you're sitting there and you're going to besiege a community with gangbangers and murderers because you don't want to put them in jail, that becomes a big problem. But could you scroll to the top of this article again, David, rather than playing around there? Yeah, Tony, you mentioned this. Just unequal justice. 18-year-old kid. We've heard about it, but the mainstream media has essentially shuttered this story. They haven't told this story. 18-year-old kid gets in a political argument with a 41-year-old man. 18-year-old kid gets on the phone with his mom to get his mom to pick him up. 41-year-old man, drunk, and by the way, his neighbors say dangerous and erratic throughout his whole life, gets in his car in a paranoid frenzy after the Joe Biden speech from the Independence Hall, imagines that this kid is going to turn out a militia to kill him and runs in, and at least that's what he said, and kills this 18-year-old kid because this 18-year-old kid had the audacity of supporting free market principles and supporting freedom and liberty. And yet the guy who ran him over is free on bail.
Yeah. It's really appalling. This is just, where's all this right-wing violence? All the violence I ever hear about, Chicago, LA, DC, anywhere, is predominantly not white supremacy violence.
No, you say Chicago, but remember Jesse Smollett was attacked at 2 a.m. below zero by MAGA lovers who attacked him. Remember, and he still contends that's true. So the fact is it's all an imagined threat that they're using as an excuse to do bad things. Let's move off of this for now. We're going to talk.
You want to go to the DHS story?
Yeah, let's go to the DHS story. A lot of you, I promise you, we're going to talk about draining the swamp. A lot of you have written comments about draining the swamp. You are correct. We do need to drain the swamp. Here's another example. Hundreds of Department of Homeland Security employees. Now, Homeland Security, they're the ones who are supposed to be securing the border, et cetera. They're the ones who are spying on everybody and making sure they're collecting all the records on every one of us. Well, hundreds of their employees took pandemic unemployment aid, even though they were working, according to an audit. Well, you know what else happened in the government? And I've talked about this before, but I'm sure there's many people on this who haven't heard about it. An audit done in December 2020, when the Trump administration was coming to an end, showed that from March of 2020 to December of 2020, 25% of the employee civil servants at the Department of Health and Human Services, which oversaw the pandemic. Remember 2020, pretty big year for Health and Human Services. 25% of them never once logged into their computer. Never once. They were working from home. Never once logged into the computer. Now we've got hundreds of DHS. By the way, if you spread that over, you can assume that occurred in government-wide at the average price tag for a government employee of $90,000 a year, which is what the average salary is of government employees. An average price tag of $90,000 an employee on a yearly basis, that's $40 billion spent on employees, just salary, who didn't ever even log in. $40 billion they stole. We talk about things like the great train robbery. Well, this is the great treasury robbery. Now we have DHS employees, and you got to bet if it happened at DHS, it happened everywhere else. Hundreds of DHS employees taking unemployment aid, even though they were getting paid their salaries, because not a single government worker got laid off. You might have gotten laid off. You might have had your salary cut. You might have had to struggle through, but not the government employees. They got every single one of the checks that people got sent because they were struggling. They got a check. But this is worse because they falsely claimed they were unemployed and collected unemployment insurance benefits, some of which were directly paid by Homeland Security to employees who they knew were working, getting paid. So this is another example of needing to drain the swamp. Tony, if you were drawing this, what would you do? How would you make this easy?
I have drawn a lot of these type of cartoons trying to point out that the socialist big government entitlement disease is permeated almost every corner, every crevice of our government. And then when we talk about draining the swamp, I think Trump ran into this, that a lot of these people, the center of the universe to these people is DC, and how they can leech off the system and fill their pockets full of the money of the tax money is coming in. And that's a big point, is that none of these people look at it like it's not their money. And somehow they forget who's paying. That's hardworking people's money pouring into the government and what they're borrowing on our great grandkids. So how do you root this out? I don't have any clue. I think Trump tried, but I think if Trump gets back in there, or if DeSantis gets back in there, I think they're going to be a little bit more savvy about who they put into the White House and who they can fire and who they should fire.
Well, let me tell you what we were recommending. We're recommending we needed to get an audit of the entire government from the time period of March of 2020 to the present to determine who has actually logged into the computer and how many times. Okay, we need to root out who these 25% were, and if they weren't necessary for 9 months during the pandemic, then they certainly aren't necessary now. So we need to root those people out. We have to identify them and set it up so we can fire them. So the first thing we need to do is we need to get an audit that determines who these people are or aren't working. Second, we need to do an audit in all departments on whether or not people got unemployment insurance checks who were not eligible, who were government employees. Those people should be fired public. Third, there's something called the Merit Act. The Merit Act allows for public employees to be fired more expeditiously. Sometimes firings take 9 months, into years to fire somebody. And this is for the most really egregious offenses, like, striking your boss. And so you've got we have to be able to move those things more rapidly. The Merit Act allows for a faster firing process. And one of the things that it was done in the VA already, and we've seen not all that many people fired, but we did see incompetent people moving out of their jobs so they wouldn't be fired. So the VA system worked better. We didn't have veterans dying on the streets because they couldn't get their VA appointments. So this is something that should be applied across the board. And what we'll see is a lot of people moving out. Third thing is, and there's some controversy on the right on this, but I think that there's a group of people who run the government. They're called the Senior Executive Service. And there's about 7,500 of them. And the Senior Executive Service are the people who are trusted with pulling the levers of power. They're supposed to be bipartisan. What we discovered under Trump and spades, we knew they weren't bipartisan, but under Trump we discovered just how not bipartisan they were. Fact is, we need to offer those people a way out before they get fired, and the easiest way to get rid of people is for them to leave voluntarily. And so we need to just give federal employees an ability to retire early and an incentive to retire early. And then in doing so, the money we spend in getting rid of them is money saved in terms of having to fight them. So that is and we get to replace them with people who are going to want to pull the levers of power in a fair and fair way. And with that's how you transform the bureaucracy overnight. So that's one of the things I'm pushing from Americans for Limited Government, because we have to get our hands on the levers of power when we take power. And that doesn't mean we need partisan Republicans. What it means is we need neutral actors in the civil service, which is how it's supposed to work. And then fourth, the Trump administration came up with something called Schedule F that made it so anybody who was involved in policymaking discussions were put in a special category and could be fired as an at-will employee. That's a lot harder to get done. It's a great thing to do. It makes a lot of sense. It's bold, but you have to get, and the Trump administration will try to do as an executive order and implement it that way, and they'll be in court for 3-4 years over it. So if Trump comes back in, that's a court battle, and who knows how that goes, in terms of because of civil service laws. So three things I outlined are things that can be done through Congress, are things that can be done rapidly. And then lastly, we RIF the people who are unnecessary, reduction in force. We eliminate their positions. If a full-time employee doesn't have to sign up, doesn't even show up for a year during a pandemic, we really don't need that position. So let's get rid of it and stop paying for those people. And that's called a reduction in force, and we do that. So those are the kind of things that I would that I think can be done, and we would dramatically change the nature of the workforce if we did those things. So we're dead set. We are in this fight, and we're going to try to get that audit done in the next after this continuing resolution during the next time when we're going to be fighting over the funding of the government, because quite honestly, the Biden administration is trying to restructure the federal workforce to include a lot more work from home. Well, it makes a whole lot more sense to actually find out how many people are actually working when they're getting paid from home before you restructure the workforce, rather than trying to figure it out afterwards. But that's
well, I know a lot of people who work from home, and there's ways of monitoring whether or not they're actually working, and maybe they need to implement some of that.
I'm sure they will. And that my bottom line on it is somebody who stole $40 billion from the American taxpayer we should be skeptical. I'm not really inclined to sit there and say, gee, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. And there are countermeasures. I know a lot of things test whether or not you move your mouse around or whatever, whether your cursor moves. And there are devices, there's programs you can buy for like $15 that'll automatically make your cursor move every 15 seconds.
I was just going to
say. And so, this is, I don't want to get into a counter spy game with these people, I want to fire the ones who didn't actually perform, who didn't show up to work. And because not because necessarily they're bad people, but if they weren't needed for a year and a half, 2 years, if they weren't needed, why are we paying them? It's just basic common sense. It's so you want to restructure the federal workforce? Fine, knock off the 500,000 people who didn't actually do any work during the pandemic. That might be a good place to start.
That'll save some money. We got a couple big tech stories and one other government corruption FBI story.
Let's just do one of them, David. I don't want to. We're pretty much
okay.
Which one do you think? YouTube scope. Okay, here's a perfect example of the garbage. Have you been following Tony? Have you been following Tony Branco? Antonio Branco. Of course, you've been following the Italian.
I have followed it a little bit. I loved her speech. It actually gave me goosebumps. I had to read it because I don't understand Italian, but I felt it was very inspirational. I think I'm sure that the elitists probably are cringing at it, probably are trying to figure out ways of shutting her up, which you can tell by her being scrubbed from social media and the news and all that, because she's a definite threat to their power.
Yeah, it's amazing. Here a woman becomes the head of Italy. You would think that would be a major win for women's rights. The glass ceilings shattering.
Yeah, equity.
You can't think of probably a more sexist group. This is generalizing. You gotta be careful. Italian men are not seen as being particularly necessarily gracious in terms of what we would consider normal. They tend to be a lot more handsy than others. Let's put it that way. But I'm going to get out of that stew that I just walked into. I'm exiting out. Bottom line is, Italy is history, and yet they're canceling her because she said things like, "Religion's important. As a Christian, religion's important." She said things like,
"Family,
the family's important." And it's a basic foundation of our civilization.
Yeah, they equated God, family, and tradition to fascism. Directly stated that.
And identity, individual identity, also was included.
Right,
in that.
Individual identity. So she took on all of the kind of attacks on who we are and how we see ourselves, and how we stay anchored as people, as individuals, into a civil society. And she made the claim, and it's brilliant, that the goal of the tax on our identity, our ability to anchor into a community, into a family, into the unmooring of an individual from any context of who they are, is nothing more than an attempt to cause people to become nothing more than consumer drones, and consumer drones who are basically manipulated and have their identity manipulated by what video game they play and things like that, rather than who they are at their core. And that is a extreme threat, because when people are anchored, when people have a relationship with God, and they know what that relationship is, guess what? They're far less likely to be manipulated. And that is what she said. That's what people voted for her to do in Italy. And the left went nuts. Hence YouTube, which many of you may be viewing this on, YouTube canceled her. Said, no, we can't have YouTube viewers around the world can't be exposed to this. Oh my gosh, this threatens their entire worldview. So
they want nice little behaved cattle, consuming cattle. They don't want any individuality. Everything she spoke to is a threat to their ultimate goal. And it's tied in with social media, YouTube, whoever counseled her.
I think they've downgraded the cattle to sheep, Tony, because of the methane production. But it's but yeah, you're right. That's 100% correct. The I'm going to now, one of the things we're going to finish up, David, with the article I wrote, because I think it's pretty controversial. And there's not that many people,
Sure.
people are hanging on. I want to talk about it. I think they'll be interested. Yesterday, I was struck by this problem. And the problem is we have rumors of Xi in China being under arrest. We've got rumors of Xi's opponents being under arrest. We have rumors of Putin being put into a potential coup against Putin. We have the Nord Stream 2 and 1 pipelines, both punctured through what appears to be sabotage. And I think everybody agrees it's sabotage. We don't know who did the sabotage. We have all these problems, and I lay them out we've got the people streaming across the southern border. We have a multitude of problems. And we have a president who gets lost on stage, who can't find his way to his handlers to get off the stage.
Looking for dead people.
Looking for dead people. You've got maybe he's becoming one with Bruce Willis in that movie where he sees.
I see dead people.
Joel Osment would say, "I see dead people." Anyway, for those of you who haven't seen that 20-year-old movie, I won't tell you the ending. But if you don't know it, you should watch it. Anyway, and so I asked the question. I don't really come to a conclusion on it, but I asked the question: is Joe Biden now in this place and time in history, where the Polish government, the Polish president, came out immediately and speculated that the United States might have been behind the destruction of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines, or at least the breaking of them, because as a way to stop Russia from having leverage over Germany, leverage over Europe. And it's the fact that Poland, which has been one of our most staunch allies in Europe, is now speculating that we might have been behind it, just shows how far the trust of the Biden administration has fallen with those who 3-4 years ago were holding massive rallies in their streets when the former president, immediate past president, was traveling to those places, and we're naming sites after Donald Trump because the peace he was bringing to the world. So, that's a shift. It's a shift that has to be not acknowledged. And the question is, can the United States afford an incapacitated Biden? And is that a threat? Is that more of a threat to the world than than Kamala Harris becoming president?
Well, can I make this point?
Sure.
Because Biden he has no idea who he is, where he's at to a large degree. I don't believe any of this is Biden. I believe it's a radical left that is putting things up on a teleprompter for him to read. And I believe that if he's taken out, or not taken out, if he's impeached or removed from office and Kamala comes in, then nothing's going to change. The same radicals that are running Biden are going to be the same radicals that are going to be running Kamala. So nothing's going to change. I just think that there are people running these things that have no clue long-term of what the effects of their radical policies are doing to the country and the world.
That's so true. The people that complain about America don't know that they'll miss it after they destroy it.
Well, actually, they're right. You're right. That's a very good point. They would rather see Trump not get elected, see Trump not there, and allow the world to be completely destroyed. At least we don't have any more mean tweets.
Yeah, well, Betty Whitworth puts a quote here that kind of reflects my feelings and what we talked about, and that is, I just wonder who's pulling the puppet strings on Biden. I suspect it's the dynamic duo of both from Obama. So basically, the Obama team that's left behind are pulling most of the strings. One's domestic policy advisor now. The other one really ran their foreign policy. I feel sorry for him, as it's painfully clear that he's not got all his marbles. Maybe early onset Alzheimer's. I don't know that it's early onset Alzheimer's. What I do know is so much of being respected in the world is built around appearance. Is built around, what do people think? How do they judge you when they look at you? The fact is, this is something Gorbachev said, and I think I've talked about it in a previous one, but I'm going to just remind people, if you go to the Reagan Library out in Simi Valley, California, one of the reasons to go to California, there was a display, and it may still exist, of Gorbachev and Reagan's meeting at Reykjavik, Iceland. It was really cold. Reykjavik was really cold. Gorbachev from Moscow showed up, along with his wife Raisa, showed up wearing furs and bundled up like Eskimos, if you can still say that. And Reagan was standing out with his business suit on, ramrod straight. And Gorbachev gets out of his car, sees how cold it is. He looks at this cowboy and he says, I can't beat him. The measure of this man was his willingness to stand in the freezing cold and withstand that cold with resolve and look Gorbachev in the eye. And that was the moment when Gorbachev decided that he had to find a way out of the Cold War, or America would destroy them. And so visuals matter. And when you have a president who wandering around on stage, shaking hands with people who aren't there, clearly, even if in private meetings, he's completely on point, completely focused, completely able to deliver cogent sentence after cogent sentence that actually follow and make sense. Even if he's able to do that, the appearance of weakness, the appearance of being incapacitated, reduces the ability of the rest of the world that for the past 75 years has depended on the United States to stand in the breach against totalitarianism. We now have, the rest of the world is looking around saying, we don't have a leader. And into every void, you end up a vacuum. You have people trying to fill that vacuum. And many of the people trying to fill the vacuum, Xi from China, Putin from Russia, the Iranian mullahs, the people trying to fill that vacuum are not necessarily the good guys. So understand, a weak appearance of a political leader is almost as bad as a weak-minded political leader. So even if he's completely functional, the appearance of him being completely lost is what the world sees, and that's dangerous. Now, the reason we have to have a discussion is because Kamala Harris is so bad, okay? Because she can't, she appears to be a functional moron, but that's why we have to have a discussion. But there are remedies that can be taken, impeachment being one, but you'll never be able to impeach Biden. The Democrats won't allow it. They do have a constitutional means to remove him for mental incapacitation. And we have to have a real discussion in this country about the future and whether or not we can afford for Joe Biden to be the leader of this country for the next 2 years.
Or if we can afford to have Kamala be the
well, that's the follow-on question. And, I would tell you the answer to that is when you have the real horse trading occurs, when you try to pick, if Biden is out of the way and Biden is found to be incapacitated and it's legitimate, not political, it's just a legitimate concern, inability to do the job. If that's found to be true by his cabinet, Then you had Kamala elevates to president, and then you end up with a debate over who's vice president. And Kamala can nominate anybody she wants to be vice president, but Congress will have to approve it. Senate will have to approve that person. And what's happened in the past is you've gotten people who are either who are a non-political threat get put into that on a bipartisan basis. You had Gerald Ford put in to replace Spiro Agnew, which led the way to Nixon's impeachment, by the way. You had once when Nixon resigned, you then had Gerald Ford elevated to president, and he chose Nelson Rockefeller. And I remember one of the reasons he chose Nelson Rockefeller is because the Democrats in the Senate said, you can't pick a Ronald Reagan. You can't pick somebody who's going to be able to be president. You have to pick somebody who's over the hill and out of their time. And so in this particular instance, you might be able to get an older, they'll be liberal, but at least somebody who still believes in America as the vice president, as being kind of the steadying influence in a Kamala Harris world. But it's, we're playing so many different dominoes. It's hard to know which ones are going to fall. But we have to have a conversation about Biden.
We definitely need to focus on this next election and be able to stop this radicalism that's happening right now. And if we can get the Republicans to win the Senate, win the House, that'll be a huge thing. And I just think that what we're experiencing now, we are literally experiencing Democrat policies. This is it. This is who they are. Whether it's the economy, whether it's the inflation, recession, fuel prices, the foreign problems overseas with Russia, Ukraine. Just go down the list. 401ks are being destroyed.
Yeah.
The vax mandates. Businesses, big box stores are allowed to thrive. Big corporations allowed to thrive. Mom and pop stores have been crushed. All of this is Democrat policies. We're literally experiencing the third term of Obama. Even Obama said that himself not too long ago before the last election, that if he could just sit in the back and just kind of manipulate things from his apartment or his house, he would be totally satisfied with that. And I believe that's happening. That's happening with his ex-staff of Susan Rice, Valerie Jarrett, Soros, I believe, is the part of. These are heavy-duty radicals that are running this country because Biden isn't doing it.
And there you go. Mark Harris, I think we're going to close on this point. We have an election, and many people are having ballots mailed now. Don't wait to start urging your friends to vote to retake America. Don't wait until November 8th. Do it now. Ballots are being mailed in many places around this country. Make certain that people who are, in some places you can still register to vote. Make sure your friends are registered and make sure that your friends vote. The key to this election is in your contact list, people. And I would just encourage you, we can sit and talk about it, but now's the time to do something about it. And the thing you can do is encourage every single person who is like-minded in your contact list to vote and urge them to also go out and spread the word. And a little personal plug, if it's, I think one of the value adds that Americans for Limited Government has is it gets people on track, and we provide them with real information that is right in your inbox. And so anybody who's out there, if you haven't subscribed to Americans for Limited Government, go to dailytorch.com and subscribe. That's dailytorch.com right there on the bottom of your screen. And you'll get something every single day, well, 5 days a week anyway, with unique content. And it's something you can share. Also follow us on Facebook and the various other social media platforms. We're on all of them. And lastly, become one of the sharing brigade on Facebook. If you're on Facebook, get into the group, the Facebook group that we've set up, and become a sharer. One of the greatest things that we can do on Facebook is if we have 236,000 people who follow us on Facebook. If 10% of those people shared our materials, we would be reaching millions of people every single day with our materials, with what we're saying, where they're urging people to vote, urging them to take action on different issues like draining the swamp. That's something you can do. It's simple. Share, share, share. We have a sharing brigade out there that shares our content. It makes a huge difference because the reach then goes off the charts. So with that, folks, I want to thank Tony. Tony, you have any final words? We're at the 1 minute, 1 hour mark here.
I only have one word that I'll finish with, and that's vote.
Very good. Thank you, folks. Appreciate you hanging in there with us. And we will be back next Tuesday, if not before, with another live stream. Tony, thank you for joining us. And if you want to get, once again, the Tony Tunes calendar is right here. Just go to, if you go to our Get Liberty site, getliberty.org, you'll be able to go to the book, the store, and you'll be able to find that. But secondly, then I would also encourage you to go to Patriot Depot and patriotdepot.com and get Tony's book. Tony's book is around here somewhere. I don't have it with me, but Tony, do you have your book?
I just so happen to have it right on hand.
Very good. Keep America Laughing.
Yeah.
That's at Patriot Depot.
And Rick, you did the intro.
I did do the intro.
You did the intro. I appreciate it too.
Not a problem.
Not very many
I tried to be funny. I tried to be funny, and I don't know if I succeeded.
You did. You made fun of my spelling. You got that in there.
So anyway, we appreciate all that y'all do, and thank you for hanging with us. And until next time, probably next Tuesday about 4 p.m., we'll be signing off. Thank you, folks. Bye-bye.
Have a great week, everyone.